Welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host, with our guest author, Dr. Ray Guarendi, author of Marriage, Small Steps, Big Rewards, published by Servant Books. Great to have you here, Dr. Ray.
Yeah, Doug, I'm getting a little tired of writing books just so I can have an excuse to get on your show.
Well, I'm much honored that you would take those steps to find your way onto Bookmark after all the other wonderful programs you've been on EWTN. Back a few months back, you were on with Father Mitch, and of course, people hear you virtually every day on EWTN's Global Catholic Radio Network.
I got an interesting call last night. You'll appreciate this. A woman called me, didn't recognize her voice. Mm-hmm. She complimented me on that book. She said, this is something that I've hoped would come out for years and years and years. I think my husband can take great benefit from this book. Mm-hmm. He needs to work on this. He can do so much better. And I said, thank you. And she said, anytime. I said, who am I speaking to? She said, I'm Mrs. Doug Keck. So I just kind of...
Yeah, for years I tried to keep your phone number away from her, but yes, well, my wife does one thing: she speaks the truth in love, and without a doubt, reading this book, in fact, when I got this book, I was really excited as well, until I opened it up and realized this purely had everything that you obviously knew about marriage, since the pages were blank. Now, I've done many books for dummies, but I never got one directed directly at me.
This hurts. You're hurting me.
So I got this. Now, this is what they call a mock-up or a dummy book, right?
Well, don't use that word. Come on.
So that gives the idea. And why do you get something like this?
Because I can't write.
Okay. Besides that, now the publisher will put this out initially before it's actually printed, right?
Yeah, probably just for what, demo?
Right, exactly. And so this is actually what the book looks like, and this is what people can find
probably,
in the stores and buy online through EWTN's religious catalog.
Given what's in that book, it's probably as beneficial like that as the actual copy is going to be.
Well, actually, I got a copy, a pre-press copy, so we can actually talk about what you actually do know about marriage. And you know what? I have to admit, you know quite a bit.
You basing that on what your wife said to me?
She told me I better talk nice to you. Now, you do so much work with families, and I would tend to think of you as more oriented towards families. Obviously, marriage and families are connected. Why did you decide to do something specifically about marriage?
Here's the scenario, Doug. Somebody walk in my office. 50% of the time, it's a kid situation. Other 50% of the time, it's life. Mm-hmm. My degree's in clinical psychology, so pretty much I run the spectrum. They start to describe what's going on with this 8, 10, 12, 15, 16-year-old. Okay, first session, first two. About the third session, it's like, Dad doesn't quite go along with this. Mm-hmm. And the reason Dad doesn't go along with this is because he thinks Mom's a shrew. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, Mom is not only a shrew with the kid, she's a shrew with me. Mm-hmm. Within a few sessions, all of a sudden, here comes the marriage. And I would say half the time, the marriage stuff starts burbling to the surface. What I did is said, well, all right, let's see what I can do about this regarding making marriages better. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the key to therapy. This is the frustration of therapy. I will confess. Confessions of an expurgated therapist. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, I know suggestions to give to somebody that would help. The hard part is convincing them to do it.
Mm-hmm. Is that because many times most people there are only so many different situations that basically you obviously come in contact with?
No.
So that
they resist. They don't want to hear it.
No, but I mean that you have the answers because what they're presenting to you many times as being a totally a unique situation. You've never had anybody like this.
Very unique that I've seen 2,000 times.
Yeah, right, exactly. So you kind of know the steps you should take, because this book is actually written in 10 steps, right?
Yes.
Okay.
But I will tell folks the easiest part of my job is giving you ideas. Mm-hmm. I can give you 20 ideas for every scenario you describe. What I can't give you is the will to do it. Mm-hmm. And so the premise of that book is, 80% of the book is, I've got to overcome your resistance to doing these little tiny things that would make your marriage better.
Right, and so after you kind of go through it and talk about the advice, then you have these standard blocks, right? Yes. In a sense, these are the things of reason why I can't do it.
Absolutely. For example, if we say, the first step is say you're sorry. I talk about how little kids have to say they're sorry. Parents just want them to learn the habit. I'm sorry. A little kid looks at the floor. I'm sorry.
Right. You make a whole point that I guess the floors had more I sorries than anybody else, right?
Yes, they're very penitent.
Right.
And so the parents in situations like that will say, well, look, I'm not going to say I'm sorry. I mean, if I say I'm sorry, he's going to think I'm totally wrong.
Right.
Or if I say I'm sorry, it's going to get thrown back in my face. Or if I say I'm sorry, what I'm essentially doing is admitting it's me.
Right.
Or this is my favorite. You'll appreciate this. I may not say I'm sorry, but I act I'm sorry.
Right, right.
That's a classic.
Well, a lot of guys will do that and say, when the wife may say things about, well, you don't show that you care. He says, well, I go to work. Everything I do shows that I love you, and likewise. But sometimes we do need to say it.
I tried that with my wife. I play softball for you. I wear cleats around my golf cleats. I said everything I do.
I bowl so well for you.
That's
yes.
right. The guys are
I bring
saying
the
your wife
trophies
must be
home.
proud.
Right, exactly.
The book is something, Doug, I'll tell you. When I first was writing it, I was thinking, I don't know what I'm talking about. This could stink. I'm looking at this thinking, I don't know if this even meshes. Well, I've gotten some feedback since, and I know you were involved in Marriage Encounter.
Yeah. So I thought this was very, very good because a lot of the things that we had learned in Marriage Encounter that I found helpful were in here. And it's also interesting, too, because, kind of Marriage Encounter came out of somewhat more of the non-directive therapy approach, and this tends to be a little more directive. So there's
my stuff in Marriage Encounter.
They stole everybody's stuff. It's God's stuff, and He gives it away. Because if it's working, it's truthful, it works, right? But let me ask you, you kind of alluded to it, and I thought this was interesting. You say, I've also learned that counseling will often end up in a different place from where it started. Or put it another way, what we all thought the trouble was may not really be what the trouble is. And that's where you got to the idea of dealing with the parents many times in a situation rather than the kid being the problem. Maybe he's an example or a function of the problem.
That's 80% of the time, that's the way it is. Somebody will call me and say, I need you to counsel my son. How old's your son? 9. And then I will say, in a very sensitive, therapeutic, affirming way, not a chance. And they'll say, well, why not? I'll say, because it's totally ineffective. I've got to work with the big people. I'm not going to have a 9-year-old sit in my office and say, Dr. Ray, I was wondering if you might help me develop some self-control. I recognize that I've been very difficult with my mother, and what I would like to do is develop more of a win-win scenario so that we can all feel good about each other in the family constellation. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I work with.
He's really fighting for a better corner to spend time out in, right? And he's really got to move up.
What
right?
he wants.
I'm not happy with this corner, no view. That's really. I'm getting a little tired of this. Right? You think we can negotiate something?
This is not a high-rent district here. Exactly. So if I go with the adults, and you put your finger right on it, Doug, the kid is a symptom of what's going on. 90% of the time, the kid's behavior problem is because the parents are not doing what they need to do regarding discipline and consistency. But 90% of the time, the world around the kid says, what is wrong with that kid? And that's what our profession does. So in the marriage situation, it's almost always, I've been waiting. I've been shrinking for a long time. A lot smaller now than I was. I'm waiting for somebody to come in my office and say this. You know why I'm here? Because I realize I'm difficult to live with. And I realize that I need a lot of help, and I brought my spouse along so my spouse can tell me what kinds of things I need to do to improve. And I don't want in any way, shape, or form for you to focus on my spouse. I got the problem. No. Everybody who walks in is, hey.
Right.
Wait till I tell you what he's like. Right. Dr. Ray, you're going to straighten him up. We don't look this way.
Right.
And that one is geared toward, hey, take a look at yourself and fight through your own resistances to do the smallest things.
Right.
You'll probably, I don't know if you had time to get to it, but there was, my final resistance rationale is I don't want to.
Right.
It's just bottom line.
Well, the bottom line is, I know you're right. I know it will help, but I just don't want to do it.
I don't want it. It's like going to the Catholic Church.
Right.
The Catholic Church makes sense. She's got truth. It's beautiful.
Well, it sounds perfect because it sounds just like what a kid would say, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the bottom line for a kid is, I don't want to do that.
That's my theory on original sin. We're all 5-year-olds.
Right. That's right. That's right. Well, let me ask you. You call something called the Cascade Effect. What is that?
Somebody walks into my office, and this kid, in their opinion, is Chucky. He's Cujo.
Okay.
So many problems, they can't even put him in alphabetical order. First thing I'll do is I'll try to get established their level of authority. Can you look at this little guy and say, please go put your head down at the dining room table. I'll set the timer. And if they laugh, it's, yeah, right. You know, he'll eat the table. Okay. I will then get them in charge. I will say, okay, here's what you're going to need to do to have that kind of authority. If they do it, what tends to happen is this. The fighting that was going on in the house drops by 50%. The kid's mood, which they think he's just an angry child, he's just mean-spirited, he's always going off, that comes down. Then they'll say, you know, he seems happier. I mean, he came up to me and he put his arms around me and kissed me. You get all of these reverberating kinds of effects on the basis of one thing. All I did is teach you to put his head down. That's all I did. I didn't do any psychological magic. How did all this come from just that? That's what I call a cascade effect. Because what you're doing is you're pulling the plug on a lot of these bad dynamics that are just feeding on each other.
Right. It's kind of, you talk about taking 2 aspirin that has multiple positive effects. You take it for one reason, but it also has other ancillary effects that cascade down, right?
Ancillary.
Supportive, whatever.
Wow.
That's right.
I'm
trying to compete.
You got to talk in ways I understand.
I'm trying to compete here. You used Expurgate, and I didn't say anything. What do you mean by daily discontented?
Daily discontented? I don't know. Where are you getting that?
It says right here, they would be more accurately be termed daily discontented. You're talking versus these deep pathologies.
Oh, yes. Okay, I see what you're saying. The diagnosis du jour is now bipolar. More and more children are being diagnosed bipolar disorder. And part of the reason for that is that their emotions are fragile. Okay? So there is a sort of ebb and flow to them, but if you get down to really scrutinizing them, no, it's not an ebb and flow. It is a all over the map. The smallest thing can make me unhappy. So what then tends to happen is we're raising a lot of people, and even in marriages, where there's no depression here. There's no pathology. This is not a person who has a characterological issue. This is someone who's just kind of unhappy and blasé about the way life is. I think in the phrase I used, I was referring to why most marriages break up. Not because the guy's a pathological gambler, not because she's had multiple affairs, not because there's alcohol all over the place, but because I don't like you anymore. It's just kind of...
Well, you talk about it elsewhere in the book, kind of like the idea, the difference between, and why communication is helpful as well, because of expectations, what people think is going to happen versus what happens. Is a big problem a lot of times with this discontent people have is because they've been convinced that there's some kind of nirvana-like experience they're going to have. If they marry the right, everything's supposed to be good, everything's supposed to be wonderful, and you know, there's the ebb and flow of life. And sometimes things are going your way and sometimes they're not, and that's just the way it is. And rather than realize that that's the way it is, they think there must be some reason this is happening to me. Can't be my fault, so I have to start to look around at what my situations or other people in my life who must be to blame.
Have you been exposed to those surveys that basically said in the U.S. we are far more discontent than most third world countries?
I can believe it.
Yes. The people in poorer third world countries rate their lives much more satisfactory than we do. The reason for that, of course, is that discontent is the gap between the way you want it to be and the way it is. Right. Well, in their lives, they're kind of used to living here, and this is their expectations, and the gap's not big. In America, I should have this. I should feel this. I should think this. I should get this. Well, I'm here. Look at this. Is
and
awful.
Isn't that what they're being told all the time,
Absolutely.
too?
They're getting relentless. It's a tsunami, just relentless.
It's an entitlement.
150 years ago, Doug, you and I, your wife, my wife, needed us. We killed food. We lifted heavy rocks. We protected her from threats in the environment.
You still, apparently, in the book, you talk about still lifting heavy rocks, don't you?
Yeah, well, that's
Can you lift 300-pound rocks?
Well, I can.
I wasn't sure by what you said in the book.
Old days.
You kind of referenced it there.
Thank you.
Okay.
And they needed us. So if they look at Doug and go, he's just not very communicative. I don't feel an emotional connectedness to Doug. I mean, he's kind of a guy. He's kind of a Neanderthal, but he does shoot. He does shoot well. And we had a problem with a cougar the other night, and Doug took it out.
It was helpful he was here.
I need him.
Right.
Well, now we've eliminated all of that, and it's so from an emotional, psychological perspective here, Doug. Are you connecting with me here?
Right. What's my benefit quotient? Right.
Yeah. What am
I
that
getting
in the
out
book?
of
That's
this?
a good phrase. I like that.
Right. You say the secret of a good marriage for the most part is that there are no secrets, only common sense, time-tested ideas practiced by countless others who've done it very well. Then why do I need this book?
Well, because I gathered all the time-tested ideas in there. I put them in one place. Actually, there's an interesting phenomenon going on here. 2 generations ago, parents had, I believe, instincts. They had a certain sense of what it meant to be a good spouse or a good father or a good mother. Some of those have been corroded. Many, many more parents are not sure what to do anymore. Right. They're just floundering.
Well, why do you think that is?
Well, because I think that there are no secrets. Yes, there are. All the psychologists have secrets. They've been telling us these secrets all along. 12 tested ways to make your marriage better. 9 proven techniques to have a child have a PhD in 3 days. And so we look at this and go, well, obviously psychology can tell us how to do this. And then when it ultimately fails, which it does, the people go, what's wrong with me? How come I couldn't get that to happen? How come I don't have that marriage? And I'm trying to tell them, we got to revert back to stuff that's been tested over centuries. These people weren't dumb 200 years ago.
Right.
They had some sense.
Now, in this book, you say, I will present 1 step per chapter, and there's like 10, and we talked about, and each simple suggestion will be followed by what I term, and you mentioned these before, the resistance rationales. Now, the rationales in each group, did those come over, is that an outgrowth of the years of doing counseling and therapy?
Sure. Because anytime I'm going to suggest anything to anybody, there's a 70% chance they're going to tell me why they can't do it.
What was the most surprising rationale you ever got somebody to give you?
That's a good one. That's a good, you got me on left field on that one. The most surprising rationale. There are the common ones.
Okay, let's talk about that.
I've done that many times before. It doesn't work. I've been doing that. Lord knows I give and give and give. Okay. Another one is, no. If I do that, she's going to run with it. She's going to be more miserable to live with than she is if I start doing it. If I start sacrificing the way you're telling me to sacrifice, she won't thank me. She'll misuse me.
Right.
Okay, that's a big one. Probably the most twisted one is the one where somebody takes a piece of behavior that I tell them to do, and they say, that's not me. That's not me. I'm not like that. I can't do that. I don't do that. That's not my personality. That's not my personhood. It's not who I am. I got this one the other day. You'll appreciate this. A wife was getting grief from her husband because she didn't get along with his parents. She goes to the family gatherings and she's pleasant. She's not nasty, but she bites her tongue. He says, well, yeah, you don't cause any trouble, but I know you don't feel like being nice. So the rationale was, if you don't feel it down in here, then it doesn't count. It's not authentic. And I said to him, well, I'll tell you what, if I had to do only those things I felt like doing, I wouldn't do a lot of good things.
Right.
But his rationale was, it doesn't count what she's doing.
But is that also because of the fact that he doesn't want to give her those credits for doing that? Because in some ways it gets into the thing like, if she's succeeding in doing something that I've asked her to do, our expectation's then going to become that there's something that she'd like me to be doing better that I'm not doing, and maybe I don't want to do that.
Did you have psychology in college? you take those grad courses?
No.
Well, you're right. The quid pro quo.
Right.
You know, all of a sudden, my sweet wife is bending over backwards to sacrifice, and I don't feel like I'm not doing that.
Right.
I don't feel like doing that.
Yeah, because I know even from Marriage Encounter many times they always talk about rocking the boat. The guy's fear is that if I change this one thing, how many other things am I going to have to change? Because once I show I can change these things, then the list will come out of all the other things I got to do. I might be open to doing this one, but I don't know if I'm willing to do all these other ones. Where does it stop?
That explains these things my wife has been giving me. She goes, we're on letter B.
That's right. Here's the honey-do list, right, as they used to say.
You know, you're right on that, because if I can, my son did this the other day. He dramatically cleaned up the house. He's 14. I said, Pete, you blew it. Why, Dad? Because now I know what you could do if you wanted. You should have just kept doing it sloppy like you've been doing the last 12 years. I wouldn't expect any more.
Well, that is some guys will do that too. You also, I thought this was, I've included a scenario for each step, a dialogue between a husband and wife, an anonymous therapist. Is your name anonymous? Each chapter concludes with a last word about the step under consideration. Now, with the actual dialogue, is that also something that came out of therapy sessions? I mean, it can't be specifically, but obviously the gist of it.
It hit me. I thought, if I'm going to make these suggestions, people are going to say, okay, that's just fine, Dr. Roy or Ray or whatever your name is, but I know what's going to happen as soon as I say it. If I sit and, there's a step in the book that's really hard for people to accept, and the step is called accept it, which means, let's say you come to me, Doug, and you say, Ray, we're not going to have you on the show anymore. Why? Well, I don't know. We've waited, and we just think you're a little bit too much of a loose cannon. Now, I could say, oh, no, wait a minute, Doug. Hold on a second. How am I a loose cannon? You know, here comes my, you better explain.
Right.
But if I accept it, if I say, okay, all right, so tell me, what is it then that you think I'm a loose cannon about? Right? I'm not agreeing with you. I may think, well, that's nuts. I'm not a loose cannon. Of course I am. But on the other hand, I got to hear how you think. I got to know. If somebody comes to me and says, why'd they kick you off a bookmark? Well, Mr. Keck said I'm a loose cannon. What? What's that mean? Well, here's what I think he means. And then I want to be able to do that. Well, in a marriage, I'll ask a partner, I'll say, why does she think that? Oh, no. What do you mean you don't know? You've lived with her for 12 years. Why does she think that you will take the kid's side? And you get this, the guys. So the phrase accept it is one that's really hard for people to do. But how do you accept it? And that's where the idea of these dialogues came in. All right, his wife says, I'm upset, I don't want to go to that party. I don't want to go to that party. Your sister's going to be there, and she snipes at me every other minute at this party. I don't want to go. So then I put the words in the guy's mouth on how to accept it, rather than he would say, oh, come on, she's not that bad. You know what she's like. You just got to ignore her.
So when you boil it down in a lot of ways, you say most of us, including me, see ourselves as more innocent than we actually are. And you go down on this one, resistance rationale number 2, my apology, will just convince him that he's right and I'm wrong. That ultimately your goal is to acknowledge your role, that we have to all acknowledge there's some responsibility in almost everything that's going on that's part of this concern or upsetment. It's very rarely have you found that it's all 100% one person, right?
That's right.
Wouldn't you say?
That's absolutely right. There's a simple relationship. The smaller I think my role is, the less likely I'm to apologize. If I sit here and go, okay, I shouldn't have cussed. I'll admit I shouldn't have cussed. That was wrong to cuss. But she provokes, okay? And then so 96% of the problem is what she did. Yeah, I cussed. That's 4%. The smaller that percentage gets, the less likely I am to apologize. And the point I'm trying to make is you apologize for your percent. I don't care if it's 6%. Apologize for the 6%.
Right.
Very few people can do that.
Well, you say a basic law of human nature says if you want another to act a certain way, try acting that way yourself.
I will look at someone, and I sometimes do marriage talks, and I'll say, all right, and I close up. Say, here it is. This is my best piece of advice I'm going to leave you with, and it's also the hardest. If you want your spouse to be a better spouse, a very simple thing you have to do. Very simple. you'd be a better spouse. That's it. It's that simple. And I said, unless you're living with Satan, who's thinking, all right, she's finally starting to act right, I'll take full advantage of her. Most people will respond. I can't continuously be nasty to you if you're not returning it. I can't. It's hard. I can't do that. Most people can't unless he's Satan.
Kind of drains your anger away. Right.
There's nothing to fuel it.
Right, exactly. Let me ask you just before we go, which, really going through the book, the one question that really struck me was, is that your favorite Monkey song you mentioned here?
I was not aware of that Monkey song. My grandmother told me the words to the song.
You only heard about that group in the past.
I've read about it.
Okay. Right.
You would know, given where you worked, you'd know the Monkees.
I was there.
They were big. Remember the Crisis? That they didn't sing their own songs?
Or play their own instruments. Right?
I was crushed. I didn't feel that bad since I found out there was 5 Lassies.
Right. Well, there's a bunch of Timmys, too. But
no, sir.
But they all looked a little different, so it wasn't that confusing. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ray. It's always great to spend some time with you. Hopefully it'll help all of us in our marriages going forward. Dr. Ray Guarendi, author of Marriage, Small Steps, Big Rewards, published by Servant Books, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Definitely worth checking it out. Check us out next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark.